FBI investigating 8 suspected domestic terrorist attacks on power grid in 4 states. Holidays bring record snow, cancelled flights, and diseases. UN says 2022 among deadliest years for Rohingya at sea. Hundreds march in Paris in tribute to Kurdish Muslims shot dead. Indian court orders survey of another historic mosque after Hindu group claims ownership. 547 detainees died in Syrian regime prisons in 2022, NGO. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight, 4 power substations in Washington state were attacked on Christmas Day. The incidents disrupted service to thousands of residents. This happened just weeks after gunfire at electricity facilities in North Carolina prompted an investigation by the FBI. Law enforcement agencies are now investigating at least 8 attacks on power stations in 4 states in the past month. The incidents underscore the vulnerability of the nation's power grid. In January, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security warned domestic extremists have been developing credible and specific plans to attack electricity infrastructure since 2020. Record snow is still disrupting life in America. It has killed at least 52 people and led to power outages and holiday travel nightmares nationwide. This has affected more than 200 million people. Thousands of flights have been canceled, including 80% of Southwest Airlines flights. And as the nation digs out from under piles of snow, 426 people died in the United States due to COVID Monday. Added to this, the Washington Post is reporting growing vaccine hesitancy is fueling a measles, chickenpox resurgence in the U.S. U.S. Marine recruits who are Sikh can keep their beards and long hair when they train at boot camp, a federal court in Washington, D.C. ruled Friday. Sikhism, a faith with more than 25 million followers worldwide, forbids the shaving of facial hair and the cutting of head hair. D.C. Circuit Court Judge Patricia Millett wrote denying Sikh recruits their right to practice their religious requirements places a substantial burden on the exercise of their faith. She also noted that the Marines' policy to be clean-shaven with short hair does not promote diversity and inclusion in the Defense Department. Giselle Clapper is a senior staff attorney at the Sikh Coalition, which helped represent the plaintiffs in the case. Clapper said Sikhs have a storied history of serving in the U.S. Army and Air Force with beards, turbans, and other articles of faith. There are about 500,000 Sikhs in the U.S. An Islamic center in West Houston appeared to have been vandalized this week. The Islamic Education Center was smeared and splattered with red paint. A video taken by Q11 News showed the words "Woman, Free Iran" and "Stop Executions" with red handprints. The markings were found on the center, a dumpster outside the center, on the street, and on a wall surrounding the center. Most of the markings have since been covered up, but among them was the name Mahsa Amini. In the past few months, there have been protests in Iran sparked by the 22-year-old Iranian woman's death while detained by the country's morality police. Police said they have surveillance video of the crime and an investigation is underway. At least 185 Rohingya refugees have landed in Indonesia after drifting at sea for weeks, police and rights activists said. The boat came ashore Monday, a day after another with 57 Rohingya landed in a separate part of Aceh on Christmas Day. As well, a boat with 180 on board is thought to have sunk in early December, NGOs and family members say. The possible sinking of a boat with 180 Rohingya on board will make 2022 one of the worst years for the community. The incidents come as refugees try to flee desperate conditions in the camps in Bangladesh, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency. Nearly 1 million Rohingya from Myanmar are living in crowded camps in Bangladesh. They include tens of thousands of people who have fled their home country after the Myanmar military's genocide against the Rohingya in 2017. As refugees undertake perilous sea voyages to reach Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, they hope to return to Myanmar, which remains under a junta government. Hundreds marched in Paris Monday to pay tribute to 3 Kurds shot dead in the city last week. Meanwhile, a judge weighed whether to charge the alleged shooter. The suspect, a 69-year-old French man, has confessed to a pathological hatred for foreigners. French media are describing him as William M., a gun enthusiast with a history of weapons offenses. He has been released on bail earlier this month. The suspect also spent nearly a day in a psychiatric facility before being returned to police custody Sunday, authorities said. The shooting at a Kurdish cultural center and a nearby hairdressing salon on Friday sparked panic in the city's bustling 10th district. It is home to numerous shops and restaurants and a large Kurdish population. Many in the Kurdish community have expressed anger at the French security services, saying they have done too little to prevent the shooting. During Monday's demonstration, several hundred people marched in the 10th district. They chanted, "Our martyrs do not die" in Kurdish and demanded truth and justice. French prosecutors are also still investigating the fire which killed 10 Muslims in Lyon, France, in the aftermath of the Qatar World Cup. We have a special segment coming up on this topic later tonight, so keep watching Muslim News. A story on India's court ordering a survey of another historic mosque comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Welcome back. A court in India's northern state of Uttar Pradesh on Saturday ordered the survey of the 17th century Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura. This was after a Hindu group claimed the mosque was built on the birthplace of Lord Krishna. The local court in Mathura asked the Archaeological Survey of India to conduct a survey after January 2nd. The report will be submitted after January 20th. The lawsuit was filed by right-wing Hindu Sena leader Vishnu Gupta, who is seeking ownership of the historic masjid's land. The mosque is next to a temple where Hindus believe Lord Krishna was born. A persistent campaign by right-wing Hindu groups to claim Mughal-era monuments and historic mosques has raised concerns among minorities, historians, and archaeologists. Political analysts in India link the BJP's rise in the political landscape to the movement to build the Grand Ram Temple at the site of Babri Mosque in the city of Ayodhya. On December 6, 1992, the 16th century Babri Mosque was razed by Hindu extremists who claimed the northern site was the birthplace of their Lord Ram. At least 4 international organizations, including Islamic Relief, have suspended their operations in Afghanistan. This is in the wake of the Taliban's ban on female staff members from working in non-governmental organizations. The Taliban's Ministry of Economy on Saturday ordered all national and international NGOs to suspend their female staff members until further notice. Save the Children said beyond the impact on the delivery of life-saving assistance, this will affect thousands of jobs amid an enormous economic crisis. The announcement sparked widespread outrage at national and international levels. It came just 4 days after the Taliban banned women from universities. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Monday his government is aiming to hold a peace summit in February with the goal of ending Russia's assault. In an interview with the Associated Press, Kuleba said every war ends as a result of the actions taken on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. Kuleba suggested the summit could be mediated by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, a vocal advocate of diplomatic talks to end the invasion. Thousands of civilians have been killed, and the war has devastated Ukraine's infrastructure and sparked a massive humanitarian crisis. Kuleba's remarks came hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin said he is ready to negotiate an end to the war. However, Putin has refused to discuss withdrawing forces from the territories he illegally annexed in September. Dozens of countries have backed peace talks to end the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Biden administration approved another $2 billion in military assistance for Ukraine during President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit. Palestinian officials and supporters welcomed Chilean President Gabriel Boric's decision to open his country's embassy in the West Bank. The West Bank has been illegally occupied by Israeli apartheid forces for 55 years. Boric made the announcement during a Wednesday evening Christmas tree lighting ceremony with Palestinian Christians. He said opening an embassy in Palestinian territory will give it the corresponding representation and respect international law. Boric stressed Palestine exists and resists. Relations between Chile and Israel have been strained. In September, Boric delayed acceptance of the new Israeli ambassador's credentials. This was after Israeli occupation forces fatally shot 17-year-old Odai Trad Salah in the head during a raid outside Jenin. Chile boasts the largest Palestinian community outside of the Middle East. Its 300,000 members live peacefully with Chile's 30,000 Jews. A total of 547 people have died in the Syrian regime's detention centers in 2022, a UK-based human rights group said Tuesday. The regime has registered thousands of forcibly disappeared persons as dead. They include prominent activists, the Syrian Network for Human Rights said in a report. The rights group said it has received more than 1,000 death certificates between 2018 and 2021. The group said more than 1,600 people forcibly disappeared from detention centers between early 2018 and November 2022 have been registered as dead. That includes 24 children, 21 women, and 16 medics. Opposition sources claim at least 500,000 people are being detained in the regime's prisons and interrogation centers. Syria has been ravaged by a civil war since early 2011. On Monday, Iranian authorities ordered a Dubai-bound flight from Tehran to land, barring family members of an outspoken Iranian football icon from leaving the country. They were also accused of taking part in anti-government protests. Ali Dai's wife and daughter were removed from the Mahan Air flight after it was ordered to land on Iran's Kish Island, about 124 miles off of the Dubai coast. Iran is widening its crackdown on dissent in response to protests against the country's clerical leadership. Protests began in mid-September over the death in custody of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Amini was arrested by Iran's morality police for allegedly breaching the country's Islamic dress codes. Dai, who retired from football in 2007, has publicly voiced support for the protests. He is one of the country's most celebrated players and an influential figure in Iran. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the recent attack on Kurdish Muslims in Paris, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Saamiyah. In France, Paris and close by areas, there have been a lot of attacks on Muslims recently, especially after the Qatar World Cup. Recently, hundreds of Kurdish Muslims marched because on their center there was an attack by white extremists, gun enthusiasts, which killed 3 people and injured many others. To discuss what is happening there with us is Yasir Louati. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for having me.
Yasir Louati is a French political analyst and human rights advocate. He's based in Paris, where he is joining us from. Please share with us a bit about with this latest tragedy where 3 Kurdish Muslims were murdered.
Well, a white person named William M., we don't know his last name, a 69-year-old man retired from the Railroad National Company, SNCF, attacked a Kurdish cultural center, and shot and killed 3 people who belong to the Kurdish community in Paris. So far, the government is adamantly refusing to call that a terrorist attack, despite the man who has been arrested said that he had a deep hatred, quote unquote, for foreigners, in that he wanted to kill as many of them as possible. But what also came to the spotlight in recent days is that this person had previously attacked a refugee camp with a saber, and the government did nothing to let the case be known by public opinion. As a matter of fact, this person, William M., he, after attacking the refugee camp, The refugees who were attacked got arrested by the police and put in for interrogation for hours. So we see that the attacker, is treated more fairly than the victims of his attacks. Now, what happened with this attack here in Paris is that we have seen the pattern of a white person feeling empowered sufficiently to attack minorities and acting as if he was given a mission. And that mission is fed by the anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner rhetoric that has been fueled to an extreme level for the past 20 years, that has been rendered mainstream by the successive governments from the left and the right, but also from a government under Emmanuel Macron that claims to be neither from the right nor from the left. And this is where we see that the political discourse being adopted has consequences in real life. And where the French government is unforgivable is that to this day, they do not want to call it a terrorist attack, despite the attack having been carried with political motives, using a weapon. It is a premeditated act against specifically foreigners, and the culprit himself admits that he did it to kill as many foreigners as possible. And what does not help, and this is where we see the blatant convergence between the mainstream media, whether they call themselves, neutral, objective, unbiased, or not, and the government. Both sides of the, how can I say, the pillars of public opinion have refused to call it a terrorist attack. And this is why I say that for white terrorists, it is Christmas every single day.
So you mentioned in your reflections there that this person was known to have attacked a refugee group, and instead of him being the focus, refugees were detained and interrogated. Was there any editorial of any media criticizing why the victims are being harassed?
Well, unfortunately, sir, no. And this is again where we see, the biased coverage when it comes to political violence. The man got arrested. Not one single newspaper took it and took the matter seriously and wrote a piece about it saying, white supremacy violence is not a theory, it is real. And for that, we also have the recent reports coming from the various domestic intelligence services throughout the European Union saying that far-right terrorism now is well organized. They were focused on cracking down on Muslim communities, and they let loose all these far-right groups despite the multiple attacks in the past 20 years. And today we are paying the consequences of it. And again, the government is not taking this seriously, and the press is helping in sweeping everything under the rug and acting as if things were just normal. Absolutely not, sir. Things at an all-high level when it comes to the dangerous attacks coming from the far right, but there is no one to listen. And this is where, when journalists complain about people not taking them seriously, we have here an episode why. People get attacked, people get killed, and yes, instead of having a critical position towards the government, they swallow everything the government sends them and then spit it back onto public opinion by adopting the vocabulary and the lexicon of those in power who failed to protect us as a population. But to make things even worse is that the Minister of Interior, who is in France enjoying a law that has allowed mass surveillance. All of our communications in France are under surveillance. Our internet service providers, they send all our data to the government. We have passed, or they have passed in October 2017, the law on on national security and against terrorism. And this law made the state of emergency permanent. The state of emergency allows the government to raid people's home, to put them under house arrest, to interrogate them, to search cars, to stop people in the street without going before the judge, which was exceptional after the Bataclan attacks of November 2015, is now permanent. And despite these laws, the Minister of Interior, Gérald Darmanin, says he was unknown to our services. I mean, how incompetent or dishonest do you have to be to come forward in the public space and say this person who had been previously arrested, who went to jail for his attack against refugees, who was released a few months ago, you come and say, we did not know this person. Muslims get arrested on a preventive basis. I mean, people on mere suspicion get arrested, house raided, put under house arrest. They can get jailed. They can get deported on mere suspicion. And the government comes and says, we didn't know this guy. And even when they catch him after killing 3 people, they refuse to call him a terrorist.
So tell me this, the people who marched, media is saying that the Kurdish people marched. Now, you know, Muslims are discriminated by and large. Kurdish people are by and large Muslims. Is that the media depicting only Kurdish people march, or there were indeed other Muslims and other allies in the society who also marched criticizing this murder?
Well, I'm not sure we can call this like, you know, a Muslim march against what happened, but indeed the Kurdish community, which is not as big as it is, for example, in Germany, they demonstrated, you know, to call out the murder of their, you know, brothers and sisters, of course. But on top of it, what did not happen is that the Minister of Interior rushed to the scene to have the cameras, you know, pointed at him, because he's preparing to run for, you know, for the presidency in 2027. So he wanted to get the spotlight on himself. And while he went over there, the police was present in massive numbers and kept Kurdish people from gathering in memory of the victims. So of course, people were outraged. They were deprived of their right to grieve the killing of innocents. And on top of it, there was the provocation of a politician who did not do his job, who went there on the crime scene to get a spotlight and make declarations before cameras. And the march that happened a few days ago in the heart of Paris by Republic Square, there were, of course, you know, Kurdish, you know, community leaders and activists, but also many representatives from the left who came in solidarity in order to express the outrage with what happened and the government's response. Now, having said that, we have to keep in mind that in France, unfortunately, because of the highly polarized situation we are in, the multiple provocations of the government and the contempt people feel toward Emmanuel Macron, that I remind your audience, sir, that he got elected while the majority of people abstained twice. It was the case during his election in 2017 and in his re-election in 2022. And the only reason he won is because he put French people before an obscene choice, either him, despite his high unpopularity, or Marine Le Pen. So he actually hijacked the election. And even with that, Emmanuel Macron has refused to calm down on his rhetoric, to stop the provocations, and to stop the agenda of repression, the laws against the social movements, the cracking, the union-busting policies we have seen in the past 10, 15 years. And at the same time, Emmanuel Macron's incapacity to speak to the nation as a president. He is only a gang leader, representing his government and pushing forward his policy. So that's why anytime there is discontent in public opinion, the outburst of anger we have seen in a couple of days in Paris, unfortunately, whether people like it or not, they will happen again. They happened before, as we saw it with the Yellow Vest movement. We saw with the multiple marches against austerity policies, against police brutality, and we saw it again with the killing of 3 Kurdish innocent people.
Now, recently, 10 people were killed, 4 of them children, in an arson in Lyon, France. And reports are saying that building was very high rise, but it was depleted situation. And they, most people who are talking about, I saw this, I saw eyewitnesses, are all Muslims. What is that? What happened to that building? Why it was in depleted condition, and why it is not clear, although 10 days have passed, that who did that?
Well, first, this, what happened, the tragedy of Lyon, where 10 people died in a fire. First, it turned out that the city mayor of Vaux-en-Velin, in the suburbs of Lyon, in the center of France, he was made aware of the conditions of the building. A couple of weeks before, the fire took place, he was told that the building is dangerous for its inhabitants and that there was an emergency exit that was sealed, preventing people from fleeing the building in case of a fire. So again, this shows the total disregard for human life by policymakers. And there is a famous video in France that went viral where the mayor of the city of Vaux-en-Velin walks into the neighborhood and he's literally dismissed by the inhabitants, asking him what he's doing over there. Why is he showing his face after having been told that the building was dangerous and that people will soon die because of not only its state, but also the absence of emergency exits? But what happened in Vaux-en-Velin, maybe if your audience can relate, is that ethnic minorities have been for decades been concentrated in poor neighborhoods, what you would call in the US, project buildings. Here we call them cité HLM, or buildings for low-income families. The problem is, once those families live there, and many of them have been there for decades, there is no proper maintenance. And as time goes by, they go, they become obsolete and they become dangerous for their inhabitants. And it's not like their inhabitants have a choice. If you take a look, for example, at a report by the Defender of Rights, or the country's ombudsman, in 2017, he was clear that if you are perceived as a foreigner, it takes you twice as long to get a proper housing. If you apply for housing, you are, most of the time discriminated against. If it takes a couple of months for a white person, it might take a year or two for an Arab or black person, let alone if that person is perceived as Muslim. So there is the consequences of structural racism in France, where people have no other choice but to live in those depleted buildings because that's what they can afford. And on top of it, policymakers not doing their job in properly maintaining those buildings and making sure that people live safely in them, even if they are old and growing obsolete because of their year of building.
Well, thank you so much, Yasser Louati, for your time. Thank you so much. Yasser Louati is human rights advocate based in Paris, France, where he is joining us from. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Back to you, Saamiyah.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.